There is a moment many people never speak about. It arrives quietly. You begin noticing that conversations feel heavier than they once did. Crowds exhaust you. Certain relationships that once felt natural now feel distant. You still care about people, yet something inside you has changed. You no longer chase constant connection. You no longer explain yourself endlessly. You no longer feel the need to be understood by everyone. And sometimes this worries you. You wonder if you are becoming cold, if something inside you is fading. But perhaps what you are experiencing is not emotional loss, but emotional strength beginning to awaken. You may have noticed how modern life encourages constant emotional exposure. You're expected to respond instantly, share constantly, react publicly, remain available emotionally at all times. Silence is interpreted as rejection. Distance is interpreted as arrogance. Privacy is interpreted as indifference. So many people stay emotionally entangled with everyone around them. They absorb moods that are not theirs. They carry expectations they never chose. They react to opinions that do not truly matter. And slowly, without realizing it, their inner world becomes crowded. Not by people physically, but psychologically. Overthinking grows. Anxiety expands. Identity becomes blurred beneath endless emotional noise. You begin living through reactions instead of intention. The Stoics recognized this condition long before modern life intensified it. They saw how easily the human mind becomes enslaved by attachment to external approval. Not attachment to love, but attachment to validation. Emotionally strong individuals often pass through a quiet turning point. They discover that constant emotional availability is not compassion. It is exhaustion. They notice how many interactions are driven by ego rather than understanding. How often conversations revolve around comparison, status, recognition, control, and something within them withdraws gently, not in anger, not in superiority, but in clarity. They begin protecting their attention because attention is life itself. The Stoics spoke often about inner sovereignty, not isolation from humanity, but independence from emotional chaos. You cannot control how others behave. You cannot control their judgments. You cannot control whether they misunderstand your intentions. Yet many people build their emotional stability upon precisely these uncontrollable things. They feel good only when praised, secure only when included, valuable only when approved. This dependence creates invisible chains, and emotional strength begins the moment those chains are seen clearly. Detachment in the Stoic sense is not rejection of people, it is freedom from emotional captivity. You may recall moments when you tried to explain yourself repeatedly to someone who had already decided who you were. No amount of clarity changed their perception. The Stoics understood a difficult truth. You are responsible for your character, not for your reputation. Reputation lives in the minds of others. Character lives within your control. Emotionally strong people slowly stop investing energy where understanding is impossible. They stop arguing with fixed opinions. Stop chasing emotional closure from those unwilling to give it. Stop negotiating their peace for temporary acceptance. This appears from the outside as detachment, but internally it is alignment. Modern relationships often encourage emotional overexposure. You are taught that closeness means constant sharing, constant reassurance, constant emotional merging. Yet merging identities often leads to suffering. You begin carrying emotions that do not belong to you. Someone else's anxiety becomes yours. Someone else's insecurity becomes yours. Someone else's instability reshapes your inner calm. The Stoics practiced emotional boundaries long before the term existed. They loved deeply, without surrendering self-command. They offered kindness without abandoning clarity, because compassion without boundaries becomes self-neglect. Perhaps you have felt this transformation yourself. You still care, but you no longer react instantly to drama. You no longer feel compelled to participate in every conflict. You no longer seek connection simply to avoid loneliness. You choose presence over proximity, and this confuses people. Some may say you changed, that you became distant, that you are harder to reach. What they often sense is not rejection. It is stability. A person who no longer depends on emotional turbulence becomes unfamiliar to those accustomed to it. Calmness can feel like distance to those who live in constant reaction. Emotionally strong individuals detach because they recognize a silent truth. Not everyone deserves equal access to your inner world. This is not arrogance, it is stewardship. Your mind is a sacred place. Every conversation, every influence, every emotional exchange leaves an imprint. The Stoics ask themselves constantly, does this strengthen my character or disturb my peace without purpose? And slowly they chose depth over quantity. Few relationships, but honest ones. Few words, but meaningful ones. Few attachments, but genuine ones. You may notice that emotional strength often brings solitude. Not forced loneliness, but chosen quiet. Because when you stop seeking validation, many superficial connections naturally fade. This stage can feel uncomfortable. The ego interprets distance as loss, but something deeper is happening. You are learning to enjoy your own company, and this is one of the rarest forms of freedom. When solitude stops feeling like abandonment, you become emotionally independent. You no longer remain in relationships out of fear, only out of genuine connection. The Stoics never rejected humanity. They simply refused emotional dependency. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire while reminding himself daily not to be disturbed by praise or insult. He engaged fully with people, yet remained internally free. This balance defines emotional strength: to participate in life without being consumed by it, to love without clinging, to listen without absorbing chaos, to care without losing oneself. Detachment becomes a form of love purified from possession. Consider social media, a place where emotions spread instantly. Outrage travels faster than reflection. Comparison replaces contentment. Identity becomes performance. Many emotionally strong people naturally withdraw from constant exposure, not because they dislike others, but because they value mental clarity. They recognize that attention is finite, and they choose carefully where to invest it. Detachment becomes protection of perception. The discipline of perception. You stop believing every opinion matters equally. You stop measuring your worth against curated lives. You return to reality. There is also another reason emotionally strong individuals detach. They accept fate. Amor fati. They understand that people will come and go. Relationships will evolve. Misunderstandings will occur despite good intentions. Instead of resisting these changes, they allow life to unfold. They stop forcing permanence where life offers movement. This acceptance removes desperation from relationships. You no longer cling to prevent loss. You appreciate what exists while it exists. And when something ends, you remain whole. Yet detachment is not effortless. There is an inner conflict. Part of you may still want universal approval, still want everyone to understand you, still fear being seen as cold or distant. You may question yourself. Am I withdrawing too much? Am I becoming indifferent? The Stoics faced this tension as well. The answer was never emotional numbness. It was intentional engagement. You remain open to sincerity, closed to manipulation, open to kindness, closed to chaos, open to connection, closed to dependency. This balance requires courage, because emotional independence means standing alone at times. Over time, a transformation occurs. You notice fewer emotional highs and lows, less internal noise, less urgency to react. Your calmness deepens. You listen more, speak less, observe before responding. People begin sensing something different about you. You no longer chase attention, and paradoxically, your presence becomes stronger. Calm strength draws respect more than emotional intensity ever could. Emotionally strong people detach, not because they stopped loving, but because they learned how to love without losing themselves. They discovered that peace is fragile when placed in the hands of others, so they placed it where it belongs, within inner sovereignty, the quiet authority over your own reactions, perceptions, and values. No longer pulled endlessly by external moods, no longer defined by shifting opinions, simply steady. And perhaps you are arriving at this stage now. You feel less interested in superficial connection, less reactive to drama, less dependent on constant interaction. You may feel misunderstood. But what if this is not isolation? What if this is refinement? Life gently removing what no longer aligns with who you are becoming. The Stoics would say this is growth, not withdrawal from humanity, but return to authenticity. As this conversation comes to its quiet close, consider something carefully. Emotionally strong people do not detach from everyone. They detach from noise, from chaos, from illusion, from emotional dependence, so they can finally connect from a place of freedom rather than need. And perhaps the real question is not why strong people detach, but this: if you no longer needed validation, approval, or constant connection, who would you choose to keep close to your soul? There is a subtle stage that follows detachment. Few people speak about it. At first, distance feels like relief. The mind becomes quieter. Conversations feel lighter. You notice how much emotional weight you were once carrying without realizing it. But after the relief comes something deeper, a silence. Not loneliness exactly, but unfamiliar space. Because when you detach from emotional noise, you also detach from distraction. And now, for the first time in a long while, you are left alone with yourself. Many people turn back at this point. They reattach quickly, return to old dynamics, re-enter relationships that exhaust them. Not because those connections nourish them, but because silence reveals truths they are not ready to face. The Stoics believed solitude was not an escape from life. It was an encounter with reality. You begin noticing your own thoughts more clearly. Without constant emotional interference, hidden patterns emerge. You see where you once sought approval, where you tolerated disrespect to avoid abandonment, where you shaped yourself to fit expectations that were never truly yours. This realization can feel unsettling because detachment removes illusion. You no longer blame others entirely. You recognize your participation in your own suffering. And this recognition is not punishment, it is power. For the first time, change becomes possible. Socrates believed that an unexamined life leads to unconscious living. Most emotional attachment is unconscious. You react before understanding why. You feel obligated without questioning whether obligation is deserved. You remain connected out of habit rather than choice. Emotionally strong people begin asking quiet questions. Why do I feel responsible for this person's emotions? Why do I fear disappointing those who rarely consider my peace? Why do I remain where my spirit feels diminished? These questions do not create distance. They create clarity, and clarity naturally reshapes relationships. You may notice something else. When you stop chasing emotional validation, some people drift away. Not dramatically, simply, gradually. Messages slow. Invitations decrease. Conversations lose intensity. At first, this can hurt. But the Stoics understood a profound principle. What leaves when you stop performing was never truly aligned with you. Many relationships survive on mutual dependency rather than mutual respect. When dependency dissolves, authenticity reveals itself. Some connections fade because they required a version of you that no longer exists. And this is not failure, it is evolution. Detachment also changes how you experience conflict. Previously, disagreement may have felt threatening. You felt compelled to defend yourself, explain endlessly, or prove your worth. Now something shifts. You listen calmly. You respond briefly. You allow misunderstanding to exist without emotional collapse. You realize that agreement is not necessary for peace. The Stoics trained themselves to accept being misunderstood, not because truth did not matter, but because emotional agitation rarely produces understanding. You conserve energy, and energy conserved becomes strength. There is a quiet dignity in no longer reacting to every provocation. You notice how often people project their fears, frustrations, and insecurities outward. Before, you absorb these projections. Now you observe them. You recognize that many reactions directed at you were never truly about you. This realization softens resentment. You stop taking everything personally, and freedom expands. Because emotional suffering often begins where personalization begins. Yet emotional strength does not mean closing your heart. This is where many misunderstand Stoicism. The Stoic does not withdraw from love. He withdraws from attachment rooted in fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of disapproval, fear of being alone. When fear fades, love changes form. It becomes calmer, less possessive, less anxious, less demanding. You allow others to be themselves, and you allow yourself the same permission. This is love without control. You may begin noticing greater patience within yourself. You no longer rush relationships. You no longer force emotional closeness. You allow trust to grow slowly. Emotionally strong people move carefully, not because they distrust others, but because they respect the value of emotional intimacy. They understand that access to the inner world is sacred, and sacred things are offered intentionally, Not freely to everyone, not withheld out of fear, but shared with wisdom. There is also a deeper acceptance emerging. Amor fati, love of fate. You begin understanding that every relationship, even painful ones, contributed to your growth. Every disappointment refined your discernment. Every betrayal clarified your values. Every ending strengthened your independence. Instead of resenting the past, you integrate it. Nothing wasted, nothing meaningless. The Stoic does not wish for a different past. He transforms experience into character, and character becomes unshakable ground. As emotional independence matures, another change occurs. You stop trying to rescue everyone. You offer support without carrying responsibility for outcomes. You listen without attempting to fix every problem. You recognize that each person must confront their own path. This realization removes hidden arrogance, because attempting to save others often comes from discomfort with witnessing struggle. Now you allow life to teach others as it taught you, with patience, with respect, with humility. You may also discover an unexpected joy in simplicity. Quiet mornings, meaningful conversations, moments without performance. You no longer require constant stimulation to feel alive. Presence becomes enough. The Stoics trained themselves to appreciate ordinary moments because they understood something modern life forgets. Peace is rarely dramatic. It is subtle. It exists in ordinary awareness, and detachment creates the space where this awareness can flourish. People may still misunderstand your calmness. Some may interpret your boundaries as distance. Others may test them, accustomed to your former availability. But emotional strength requires consistency. You remain kind without surrendering limits, gentle without becoming passive, present without becoming consumed. This balance is rare, and rarity often invites misunderstanding. Yet inner peace no longer depends on universal approval. You accept being seen imperfectly. Over time, detachment reveals its true purpose. It was never about leaving people behind. It was about returning to yourself. Returning to a self not defined by reactions, expectations, or external validation. A self capable of connection without dependency. A self grounded enough to face uncertainty without fear. You become someone who chooses relationships freely. Not from loneliness, not from obligation, not from insecurity, but from alignment. And perhaps the deepest realization of all begins to emerge. You were never meant to belong everywhere. You were meant to belong truthfully. Emotionally strong people detach so that when they finally connect, they connect honestly, without masks, without performance, without losing themselves. And in that honesty, fewer relationships remain, but those that remain become deeper than anything forced by need. So as you sit with this idea, notice what resonates quietly within you. Notice which relationships bring calm and which bring confusion. Notice where your energy expands and where it quietly drains. And ask yourself without judgment, are you detaching from people or finally returning to the person you were always meant to be? There is another phase few people anticipate. After detachment, after silence, after the gradual reshaping of your inner world, life begins testing your new strength. Not loudly, but subtly. Someone from your past reappears. An old dynamic tries to return. A familiar emotional pull invites you back into patterns you have already outgrown. And in these moments, you discover whether detachment was temporary or whether transformation has truly taken root. The Stoics believed wisdom is revealed not in solitude, but in encounter. It is easy to feel calm alone. The true measure of emotional strength appears when you stand again before situations that once disturbed your peace. You notice the difference immediately. Where you once reacted, you now pause. Where you once explained endlessly, you now speak simply. Where you once feared losing connection, you now remain steady even if connection fades. This is self-command, quiet, unannounced, unmistakable. You may begin recognizing something surprising. You no longer need people to behave differently for you to feel calm. Their moods remain theirs. Their opinions remain theirs. Their expectations remain theirs, and you remain yourself. This separation creates emotional clarity. Before, boundaries felt like walls. Now they feel like understanding. You do not withdraw from humanity. You simply stop abandoning yourself within it. There is a profound peace in realizing that not every relationship must continue. Modern culture often treats every ending as failure, but nature itself teaches otherwise. Seasons change, leaves fall, rivers shift course. Continuity is not always growth. The Stoics observed life as movement. Some people walk beside you for years, others for moments. Detachment allows gratitude without possession. You appreciate what was without demanding permanence. And this releases enormous emotional tension, because much suffering comes from trying to preserve what life naturally transforms. At this stage, loneliness may appear again, but it feels different now. It is no longer sharp or desperate. It becomes spacious. You begin hearing your own thoughts more clearly, understanding your desires without outside interference, feeling comfortable without constant stimulation. Loneliness transforms into solitude, and solitude becomes strength. Socrates walked among people, yet belonged first to his own conscience. The Stoic path invites the same loyalty, to live in alignment with your inner voice rather than external pressure. You may notice another quiet shift. You stop seeking emotional intensity. Drama loses its appeal. Arguments feel unnecessary. Excessive emotional highs and lows seem exhausting rather than exciting. This does not mean life becomes dull. It becomes stable. And stability allows deeper joy, a calm conversation, shared silence, genuine laughter without performance. Emotionally strong individuals often appear reserved not because they lack emotion, but because they no longer confuse intensity with meaning. They choose depth over stimulation. There is also a humility that emerges. You recognize that everyone is fighting unseen battles. You become slower to judge. Detachment softens harshness, because when you no longer need others to validate you, you stop demanding they meet your emotional expectations. You allow people to be imperfect, just as you allow yourself to be imperfect. This creates compassion without entanglement, care without exhaustion, presence without sacrifice of self. Perhaps the greatest transformation is this: you stop trying to be everything to everyone. For years, many people live as emotional caretakers. They stabilize rooms, absorb tension, keep peace at personal cost. Detachment ends this unconscious role. You understand that harmony built on self-neglect is fragile. True harmony begins internally. And when you become internally stable, you no longer carry emotional burdens that were never yours to carry. You offer support freely, but no longer at the expense of your own well-being. The Stoics practiced something subtle yet powerful. They prepared themselves daily for misunderstanding, not pessimistically, but realistically. They accepted that even sincere actions may be misinterpreted, and once this acceptance settles within you, fear of judgment loses its power. You speak honestly, act calmly, live consistently, without constantly adjusting yourself to match expectations. You become internally anchored, and anchored people do not drift with every emotional current around them. There comes a moment when detachment reveals its final lesson. You realize that emotional strength is not about distancing from others. It is about no longer abandoning your inner peace for temporary connection. You still love, you still care, you still participate fully in life, but your identity no longer dissolves within relationships. You remain whole whether alone or accompanied. This wholeness changes how you connect. You listen more deeply because you are not seeking validation. You love more freely because you are not afraid of loss. You forgive more easily because resentment no longer defines you. Detachment becomes the foundation for authentic connection, and something quietly beautiful happens. The right people begin to feel different around you. They sense calm rather than need, presence rather than pressure, acceptance rather than expectation. These connections grow slowly, without urgency, without performance. They do not require you to shrink or exaggerate yourself. They allow you to remain exactly who you are becoming. This is the paradox of emotional strength. The more comfortable you become standing alone, the more meaningful your relationships become. As this reflection deepens, you may recognize that detachment was never withdrawal from life. It was preparation. Preparation to meet life without fear, without dependency, without losing yourself. The Stoics sought freedom not from people, but from emotional slavery. And perhaps you are discovering the same freedom now. A calm independence, a quiet confidence, a peace that does not disappear when circumstances change. So sit with this gently. You are not becoming distant. You are becoming discerning. You are learning that your inner world deserves protection, that your attention is valuable. That connection is sacred when chosen consciously. And as you move forward, carry this final reflection with you. If you no longer stayed where you felt emotionally small, what kind of life would begin to open before you? There is a final layer to this journey that reveals itself slowly. It does not arrive as a dramatic realization. It feels more like awakening from a long habit. You begin to see that emotional strength is not built through isolation alone, nor through constant connection, but through balance, a quiet harmony between openness and independence. At this stage, detachment no longer feels like something you are doing. It becomes something you are. You move through conversations without losing yourself. You care without becoming overwhelmed. You listen without absorbing every emotion around you. And perhaps the most surprising change is this. You no longer feel the need to explain your peace. In earlier phases of life, you may have felt compelled to justify your choices, why you needed space, why you withdrew from certain dynamics, why you no longer participated in emotional chaos. You wanted others to understand. But emotional maturity brings acceptance that understanding from others is not required for inner stability. The Stoics knew this deeply. They practiced living according to reason and virtue rather than approval, not because they rejected people, but because they understood that approval is unpredictable. Today you are praised, tomorrow you are criticized. The external world changes constantly. Only character remains steady, and so emotionally strong people root themselves in character rather than perception. You may also notice a softening within yourself. Detachment, when mature, does not harden the heart. It makes it gentler. You become less reactive to insult because your worth is no longer negotiable, less threatened by disagreement because identity no longer depends on agreement, less fearful of loss because you trust your ability to endure. This gentleness is often mistaken for distance, but it is actually confidence without aggression, calm strength instead of defense. The Stoics admired this form of power, the ability to remain composed even when emotions around you rise like storms. You do not suppress feeling. You simply refuse to surrender your inner balance to every passing wave. There comes a moment when you realize you no longer chase belonging. You allow belonging to emerge naturally. You stop forcing friendships that require constant effort to maintain harmony. You stop holding conversations that drain your spirit. You stop remaining in environments where authenticity feels unsafe. And as unnecessary connections fall away, something unexpected happens. You begin recognizing the difference between being liked and being understood. Being liked is easy. It often requires performance. Being understood is rare. It requires authenticity. Emotionally strong people choose understanding over popularity, even if that means standing alone for a time. Loneliness, once feared, transforms again. It becomes spacious rather than empty. You notice beauty in quiet moments, meaning in ordinary experiences, peace in routines once overlooked. The Stoics practiced gratitude not as optimism, but as perception. They trained themselves to notice what already exists instead of longing endlessly for what does not. And in this awareness, life becomes sufficient. Not perfect, but enough. You may also discover forgiveness growing naturally within you. Not forced forgiveness, not forgetting harm, but releasing the emotional weight of resentment, because resentment binds you emotionally to what you have already outgrown. Detachment allows memory without captivity. You remember lessons. You release bitterness, and this release frees enormous mental energy. Energy once spent revisiting past wounds now becomes available for presence, for growth, for living. At this point, emotional strength reveals its deepest truth. You were never detaching from people. You were detaching from illusion. The illusion that everyone must understand you. The illusion that connection must be constant. The illusion that peace depends on external harmony. When illusion fades, reality becomes simpler. Some people will walk beside you. Others will not. Some will appreciate your calm. Others will misunderstand it. And none of this threatens who you are, because identity no longer rests outside you. Inner sovereignty has taken root. The Stoics described freedom not as the absence of difficulty, but as independence from emotional slavery. You still experience disappointment. You still feel sadness. You still encounter conflict. But these experiences pass through you without defining you. You respond instead of reacting. You remain steady even when life shifts unexpectedly. And this steadiness creates a new kind of confidence, a quiet certainty that whatever happens, you will meet it with dignity. Perhaps now you understand why emotionally strong people seem selective with their energy. They are not avoiding humanity. They are honoring life. They know time is limited, attention is precious. Peace is fragile when given carelessly, so they choose carefully. They invest deeply where authenticity exists. They step back where chaos persists. They protect the inner world that allows them to live consciously. This is not detachment born from fear. It is detachment born from wisdom. And something profoundly human emerges at the end of this path. You become capable of loving without possession. You allow people freedom. You allow yourself freedom. Relationships become invitations rather than necessities. You remain because you wish to remain. You care because care flows naturally. And if separation comes, you grieve without losing yourself, because you understand that connection enriches life, but does not define your worth. As this conversation gently reaches its final stillness, consider how far this journey has traveled, from confusion to distance, to clarity to peace. Perhaps emotional strength was never about becoming less connected. Perhaps it was about learning to stand firmly within yourself so that connection becomes a choice rather than a need. So let this final question remain with you after the video ends, quietly echoing inward. If you no longer feared being alone, how differently would you love the people in your life?